Hi guys, this is Mr. Tan, and today, we're looking at international marketing and globalization. We are in week 3 and PowerPoint slides 1. And today in the learning objectives, in this chapter we're going to examine the importance of FDI, financial direct investments, to the operations of international companies. We begin by exploring the growth of FDI in recent years and investigating its sources and destinations. We then look at several theories that might attempt to explain some of the FDI flaws. Next, we turn our attention to several important management issues that arise in most important decisions about whether a company should undertake FDI or not. So then this chapter will close by discussing the reasons why governments encourage or restrict FDI and the methods they may actually use to accomplish their own goals. When we look at the VW group, owns 10 of the most prestigious and well-known automotive brands in the world. From its 48 production facilities worldwide, the company produces and sells around 8 million cars annually to over 150 different countries. Volkswagen is a top-selling manufacturer in South America and China accounts for about 30% of VW's total sales. Volkswagen has an ambitious goals of US expansion and is adapting designs to domestic tastes, cutting prices and adding inexpensive production capacity. The company uses a modular strategy in production and lets it use the same key components in 16 different vehicles, 7 million units across its brands. So therefore you're getting kind of like efficiency and effectiveness from the same production methods, using the same components. Volkswagen like other companies elsewhere, received plenty of help in getting where it is today. But until recently, Volkswagen received some special protection from its own legislation known as the VW law. The law gave the German state of Lower Saxony, which owns 20.1% of the Volkswagen company, the power to block any takeover attempt that threatened local jobs and the economy. So Volkswagen's special treatment lies in its close ties between the German government and management, and its importance to the national economy, where it employs tens of thousands of people. This table here shows various alternatives to foreign expansion, including equity arrangements, in terms of the home country, exporting, foreign countries, wholly owned, where you own the whole operation, partially owned, joint ventures, where you may go into a joint venture with another company which may be in that foreign country, and equity alliances. And then you have non-equity arrangements like licensing agreements. Licensing agreements where you may take the brand or technology and then use that to create your own products in another country. Franchising agreements like McDonald's, for example, where you pay a commission but you take on their brand, their way of doing things, their equipment, you buy their products, and you may pay X percentage of your total sales per month, given all the facilities and help that they give you and using the brand. Management contracts, where other companies may actually come in and manage your operations for you, but then there are pros and cons of this, in that these people who are managing your operations may also be managing other competitors' operations and may then know all the information about your business and your customers, likewise the competitors. And then you also have turnkey operations as well. Acquisitions versus Greenfield. You got acquisitions, Greenfield investments, and leasing. Acquisitions is, one reason a company to invest abroad via acquisition is to obtain some vital resource that otherwise may be slow or difficult to secure. Making Greenfield investments, foreign companies may face local roadblocks to acquisitions. For example, local governments may want more competitors in the market because fearing market dominance. In addition, A foreign company may find that development banks prefer to finance new operations because they create new jobs. And then you have leasing. Leasing, this mode is much like an acquisition, but one of the forges that you need to invest, while common in this hospitality industry, it is not common in others. Although companies in other industries might lease certain assets abroad, computers, vehicles, buildings, such arrangements are quite difficult from leasing an entire operation facility. So you don't actually own it as such because you're leasing that for a specific period of time under a specific contract or agreement. So, what do you think? Which is better, Greenfield or acquisition? A Greenfield strategy, build a subsidiary from the ground up. A Greenfield venture may be better when the firm needs to transfer organizational embedded competencies, skills and routines and culture and processes. And you might have, in the previous slides we looked at the value chain, and you had the primary activities and you had the secondary activities. And if you recall, when we looked at the secondary activities, part of those secondary activities would have been the infrastructure. So if you're acquiring another firm, does that company have the consistent infrastructure? Probably not in relation to your company. And then will you have to restructure everything to put in place the right technology, the right infrastructure, the right way of doing things in order to be consistent with your own company? Whereas with the Greenfield strategy, you build it from the ground up, so you actually build it in line with your own company, your processes, practices, your infrastructure, and your secondary activities within the value chain. So that could be an argument. But on the other side of the coin, the Greenfield strategy does take more time to build up and to implement. And then you have the acquisition strategy. Acquire an existing company. Acquisitions may be better. There are well-established competitors or global competitors interested in expanding. So the volume of cross-border acquisitions has been rising for the last 2 decades. But on the other side of the coin, you have the acquisition strategy. Everything is in place. They have an existing customer base. Customers are probably happy with that existing company. They know the way of doing things, and you just may need to change things, implement different policies and practices. You may need to implement some IT in terms of making this consistent with your own company, but in the main you're good and ready to go, and perhaps you could change things as you go along. So why choose acquisitions? Well, acquisitions, are better because they are quick to execute. They enable firms to preempt their competitors. They are less risky than Greenfield ventures because Greenfield ventures take more time to implement. Acquisitions can fail when the acquiring firm overpays for the acquired firm. The cultures of the acquiring firm firm clash with your own culture. Anticipated synergies are slow and difficult to achieve, and there is an inadequate pre-acquisition screening. So to avoid these problems, firm should carefully screen the firm to be acquired and more rapidly to implement the integration plan. Why choose the Greenfield site? Well, the main advantage for the Greenfield venture is that it gives a firm a greater ability to build the kind of subsidiary company that it actually wants, but Greenfield ventures are slow, as we mentioned before, to establish, and Greenfield ventures as well can be risky. So when we look at this table here, collaborative arrangements and international objectives, objectives of international businesses includes, sales expansion, resource acquisition, risk reduction. And these obviously lead into your motives for collaborative arrangements and motives for collaborative arrangements in terms of specific to international business or general. General might be, to spread and reduce costs, specialize in various competencies that you may not have in your organization, avoid or counter competition, secure vertical or horizontal links, vertical integration backwards or vertical integration forwards or horizontal links. learn from other companies in terms of how they do it in that environment. And then specific to international business, gain, location specific assets, overcome legal constraints that the government may have, because this is already in place and they've already got all the legal documentation that they need to operate. Diversify geographically, minimize exposure, in risky environments. So factors, to consider in collaborative arrangements include trade-offs and limitations. Trade-off and limitations, the operating modes for foreign operations differ in the amount of resources a company commits and the proportion of the resources it allocates abroad. In this respect, keep in mind that there are trade-offs. A decision, let's say, to take no ownership abroad, such as by licensing another company to handle foreign production, may reduce exposure to political risk. If we're thinking about alliances, vary, by objective and from place to place in the value chain. These variances, have led to terms that describe different types. Scale alliances, link alliances, vertical alliances, horizontal alliances. In a link alliance, firms use their partners competently resources to expand into new businesses. Nokia did this to develop, their market of cellular phones. A vertical alliance connects firms to different links of the value chain, such as food franchisor with a franchisee. A horizontal alliance, such as the Mexican joint venture between Mercedes and Infinite, enables each partner to extend its product offerings. So we also have, prior company expansion. Each time a company adds products or businesses that it wishes to internationalize, it must decide on an operating form. If it already has operations, especially wholly owned ones, in a foreign country, some of the advantages of collaboration are no longer as important. And then compensation. Collaboration also implies sharing revenues and knowledge. There are different types of arrangements for entering into foreign markets, and these include licensing, franchising, management contracts, turnkey operations, joint ventures, and equity alliances. Licensing, the rights to use intangible property, may be an exclusive license. The licensor can give rights to other companies for the specific geographic area for a specific period of time, or a non-exclusive one. Franchising, is a specialized form of licensing. The parties act almost as a vertically integrated company because they are independent and each creates parts of the product or service that ultimately reaches the end consumer. Management contracts, an organization may pay for a management assistant under a management contract when it believes that another can manage its operations more efficiently than it can, usually because the contractor has industry specific capabilities. Turnkey operations. Company handling turnkey operations are usually industry-equipped manufacturers, construction companies, or consultant firms. Manufacturers also sometimes provide turnkey services when they are disallowed to invest. Joint ventures, although usually thought to be 50-50 companies, joint ventures may nonetheless involve more or two companies, and one in which a partner owns more than 50%. It doesn't necessarily need to be 50-50. Equity alliance is a collaborative arrangement in which at least one. So when we look at this, here are the advantages and disadvantages of different entry modes, and you have to decide this. Exporting, turnkey contracts, licensing agreements, franchising agreements, joint ventures, wholly owned subsidiaries. And you have the advantages and you have the disadvantages. So, advantages of exporting, ability to a realized location and experience curve economics. Disadvantages: higher transportation costs, trade barriers, problems with local marketing agents. And if we're thinking, on the other end of the scale, wholly owned subsidiaries, well, the advantages are protection of technology, the ability to engage in global strategic coordination, the ability to realize location and experience of economies. Whereas the disadvantages are high cost and high risks. And, I think as you go down the list, I think one of the additional things is that the risks become more as you go down from exporting to wholly owned subsidiaries. Types of arrangements. Again, you have a number of partners in the types of arrangements, and ownership continuing in terms of sharing. And this really then looks at the collaborative strategy and the complexity of the degree of control and risk combined together with the number of partners. So on the left hand side you've got wholly owned, and then you moving to your right you've got consortium, joint ventures and equity alliances, and then moving further to your right in terms of non-equity you've got management contracts, turnkey, franchise, license and sales contracts. And if we look about the country's attractiveness in terms of the strength matrix, then we can plot it in terms of its attractiveness, in terms of the company's attractiveness and its competitive strength in terms of being high, medium and low, or competitive strength again being high, medium and low. So if you've got company attractiveness being very high and you've got your competitive strength being high, then you maximize commitment, such as a wholly owned operations. But if the competitive strength is low and the country's attractiveness is low, then you're really going to the other end of the scale in terms of minimizing the commitment, such as for a non-equity arrangement. So how can foreign firms enter foreign markets? Well, there are 6 different ways to enter a foreign market. Exporting, a common market first step for many manufacturing firms. Later firms may switch to another mode. Turnkey projects, the contractor handles every detail of the project in a foreign client for a foreign client, including the training and operating personnel. At completion of the contract, the foreign client is handed the key to the plant that is fully operational and ready to go. We've got licensing agreements. A licensor grants the rights to intangible property to the licensee for a specific time period, and in return receives a royalty fee from the licensee. Patents, inventions, formulas, processes, designs, copyright and trademarks. And then you have the franchising, a specialized form of licensing in which the franchisor not only sells his intangible property to the franchisee, but also insists that the franchisee agrees to abide by strict rules as to how it does business. So used primarily by the service firms. But if we can see the management focus, whereby we've seen the phenomenon of Joby, a Philippine multinational, describes the remarkable success story of Joby, a fast food chain from the Philippines. Not only stood its ground when McDonald's invaded its market in 1981, but managed to find the weakness in the larger company's global strategy and capitalized then. Joby, unlike McDonald's, tailored its menu to the local market. The company was able to build on its localization strategy, and as it expanded into the neighboring Asian countries and the Middle East, today Joby. So continuing, how can firms enter foreign markets? Number five, joint ventures. With a host country, a firm that is jointly owned by two or more otherwise independent firms. A joint venture, doesn't have to be 50-50. One company can own more than the other, and it can be more than one company in the partnership. Wholly owned subsidiary, where the firm owns 100% of the stock. Set up new operation, acquire new established firm. But as we've looked at, there are advantages and disadvantages of each of these. Advantages and disadvantages, which boils down to the amount of risk and the amount of control that one wants to take when entering into another country. Exporting is attractive because it avoids the cost of established local manufacturing operations. It helps the firm to achieve experience curve and location economies. And some of the reasons why it's unattractive, because there may be lower cost manufacturing locations, higher transportation costs and tariffs, could make it uneconomical, and agents in a foreign country may not act in the exporter's best interests. So again, with everything, there are going to be advantages and disadvantages. Why choose a turnkey arrangement? Turnkey projects are attractive because they know the way of earning economic returns from know-how required to assemble and run a technologically complex process. So they can be less risky than conventional financial direct investment. And they can be unattractive because the firm has no long-term interest in the foreign country, or if the firm may create a competitor. So if the firm's process technology is a source of competitive advantage, then selling this technology through a turnkey project is also selling competitive advantage to potential and actual competitors themselves. So you'll have to be very careful who you're selling this to. As regards to licensing, this is attractive again. The firm avoids development costs and risks associated with opening a foreign market. The firm avoids barriers to investment. The firm can capitalize on market opportunities without having to developing new applications itself. It would already have these. But on the other side of the coin, the firm doesn't have the tight control required for realizing experience curve and location economics. The firm's ability to coordinate strategic moves across countries is limited. Or, proprietary or intangible assets could itself be lost. A franchise is attractive because it avoids the costs and risks of opening up a completely owned store in another foreign market. And firms can quickly build a global presence from a franchise. Franchising is unattractive because it inhibits the firm's ability to take profits out of one's country to support competitive attacks in another. And geographic distance of the firm from its franchisees can make it difficult to detect poor quality and to monitor exactly what they're doing, how they're doing it, and if it's actually damaging the brand. Why choose a joint venture? Joint ventures are attractive because firms benefit from a local partner's knowledge of the local market, culture, language, political systems and business systems. The costs and risks of opening up a foreign market are shared, and to satisfy political considerations in order to actually enter the market, which you may not have access to unless you actually undertake a joint venture. Joint ventures can be unattractive. The firm risks losing control of its technology to its partner. The firm may not have the tight control to realize the experience curve or location economics. And shared ownership can lead to conflicts and battles for control if goals and objectives differ or change over time. And that's been one of the problems with joint ventures, and getting it clear from the beginning exactly the responsibilities, aims, objectives, and the way that the company is moving. Wholly owned subsidiaries. Wholly owned subsidiaries are attractive because they reduce the risk of losing control over core competencies. They give the firm the tight control in different countries necessary for global strategic coordination. and then they may be required in order to realize location and experience curve economics. But on the other side of the coin, wholly owned subsidiaries bears the full cost and risk of setting up overseas and its operations. And we've seen this with Tesco's, and as I mentioned before, Tesco's went into the USA, tried to compete with Walmart, and they found they could not do it, and they eventually had to leave the USA and pulled out, losing over £2 billion. So why wholly owned? FDI, financial direct investment, because of market failure, internationalization theory, approachability theory, and freedom to pursue global objectives. So, if we think about market failure, collaboration is appealing as an entry strategy because it means whereby a firm may reduce its liabilities to foreignness. But this works only if the management can find an associated knowledgeable about the host country at acceptable terms to both companies, which may be impossible since such companies may be inadequately equipped to deal with efficiency and the entry companies of technology. Internationalization theory, well, this theory is in control through self-handling of operations. The concept comes from transactions, cost theory, which holds that companies should seek the lower cost between self-handling of operations and contracting another party to do it for them. Approachability theory. Well, the idea of denying rivals access to resources is called approachability theory. Companies are reluctant to transfer vital resources, capital, patents, trademarks, and management know-how to another organization for fear that their competitive position could be undermined, and these people could be your future competitors. Freedom to pursue global objectives. A wholly owned foreign operation permits a company to more easily participate in a global foreign direct investment. Pursue of physical assets in a significant amount of the ownership stock of a company in another country to gain in a measure of management control. And portfolio investment that does not involve obtaining a degree of control in a company. So, when we're looking at international flows in capital, FDIs, the purchase of physical assets or a significant amount of the ownership stock of a company in another country in order to obtain a measure of management control. But there is a wide disagreement on what exactly constitutes FDI. Nations set difficult thresholds at which they classify an international capital flow as an FDI. The US Commerce Department sets the threshold at 10% of stock ownership in a company abroad, but most other governments set it anywhere from 10 to 25%. By contrast, an investment that does not involve obtaining a degree of control in a company is called a portfolio investment. So we can see the difference there between the foreign direct investment and the portfolio investment. So here, this graph here shows the pattern of foreign direct investment. As shown in this figure, the global FDI flows averaged, $548 billion annually between 1994 and 1999. FDI inflows peaked at around 1.4 trillion in 2000 and then slowed. FDI inflows benefited from strong economic performance and high corporate profits in many countries between 2004 and 2007, at which point it reached an all-time record of more than 1.9 trillion. Global recession meant declining FDI inflows in 2008 and 2009, and FDI inflows climbed again in 2010 and 2011, and then dipped again in 2012 and 2013 and 2014, and then rose to nearly 1.8 trillion in 2015 as the world emerged from recession. When we look at the drivers of FDI flows, well, These drivers include globalization, mergers and acquisitions. In globalization, as countries, lowered their trade barriers, companies realized that they could now produce in the most efficient and productive locations and simply export to their markets worldwide. This set off another wave of FDI flows and low-cost emerging markets. The forces behind globalization are therefore part of the reason for long-term growth for FDIs. And the other reason why is because of the international mergers and acquisitions. The number of mergers and acquisitions, M&As, and their strong values over time also underlined long-term growth for FDIs. In fact, cross-border M&As, mergers and acquisitions, are the main vehicle through which companies undertake these FDIs. If we look at figure 2, the value of cross-border mergers and acquisitions, peaked in 2000 at around 1.2 trillion. After 3 years of falling FDI, and the value of cross-border M&As rose to about 1 trillion in 2007. Mergers and acquisitions activity then cooled in 2008 and fell significantly in 2009 due to the global recession. The value of cross-border M&As activity then fluctuated for several years before climbing back to 721 billion US dollars in 2015. Worldwide flows of FDI. Well, driving FDI growth are more than 100,000 multinational companies with more than 900,000 affiliates abroad, roughly half of which are in the developing countries. In 2014, for the first time ever, developing countries attracted greater FDI inflows than they did in the developed countries. So developed countries account for around 41%, 522 billion of total global FDI inflows, more than 1.28 trillion in 2014. And by comparison, FDI inflows to developing countries account for around 55% of world FDI inflows, approximately 699 billion US dollars. The remaining roughly 4% of global FDIs went through countries such as Southeast Europe in various stages to transition from communism to capitalism. So if we look at the theories of foreign direct investment, international product life cycle, the international product life cycle theory states that a company begins by exporting its products and then later undertakes FDI, financial direct investment, as a product moves through its life cycle. So in the new product stage, a good is produced in the home country because of uncertain domestic demand, and to keep production close to the research department and development of the product. In the maturing stage, the company directly invests in production facilities in countries where demand is great, enough to warrant wholly owned production facilities. And in the final stage, the standardized product stage, increased competition creates pressures to reduce production costs, and in response, a company builds production capacity in low-cost developing nations to serve its markets around the world. So despite its conceptual appeal, the international product life cycle theory is limited in its power to explain why companies choose FDI over any other forms of market entry. Theories of foreign direct investment, types of market imperfections include trade barriers, specialized knowledge, and market imperfections, internationalization. So market imperfection theory states that when an imperfection in the market makes a transaction less efficient than it could be, a company will undertake FDI, financial direct investment, to internalize the transaction and thereby remove the imperfection. There are two market imperfections that are relevant to the discussion, which include trade barriers and specialized knowledge. So we look at trade barriers. These again, as mentioned previously, are tariffs. Are a common form of market imperfection in international business. The presence of a market imperfection tariffs might cause companies to undertake direct FDI. And then we have specialized knowledge. Well, The knowledge could be technical expertise of engineers or the special marketing abilities of managers. So when a company's specialized knowledge is embedded in its employees, the only way to exploit a market opportunity in another nation may be to undertake FDI. The possibility that a company will create a future competitor by charging others fees for its access for its knowledge is another market imperfection and encourages FDI. So now we look at eclectic theory, and with eclectic theory you have location advantage, ownership advantage, and internalization advantage. So eclectic theory states that a firm undertakes foreign direct investment when the features of a location combine both the ownership and internalization advantages to make the location appealing for investment. So location advantage is the advantage of locating a particular economic activity in a specific location because of its natural or acquired characteristics. The ownership advantage has an advantage which arises from the ownership of some special asset such as a powerful brand, technical knowledge, or management ability. The internalization advantage is an advantage that arises from internalizing a business activity rather than leaving it to a relatively inefficient marketplace. The market power theory states that a firm tries to establish a dominant market presence in an industry undertaking FDI. The benefits of trying to get market power is for greater profits, because if a firm is far better able to dictate the cost of its inputs and the price of its outputs. So one way a company can achieve market power or dominance is through vertical integration, the extension of a company's activities into stages of production that provide a firm's inputs backward integration, or that it absorbs its output forward integration, which leads to market power. And we've seen this with Zara. And Zara started with one shop in Spain, and now they have over 2,000 shops. They do not do any advertising. They have vertically integrated backwards into 85% of their manufacturing of their designs and their clothes. And then they've also gone further backwards in terms of having designers and analyzing the marketplace quickly, whereby they get their analysis, their designs to marketplace within 6 weeks, which normally takes 6 months. And Zara turnover almost 20 billion US dollars a year, which is absolutely amazing. So we can see the benefits of market dominance and power. When we look at the management issues in foreign direct investment, the issues include the level of control, the purchase or build decision, production costs, the customer knowledge, following clients and following rivals. When we think about the control, many companies investing abroad are greatly concerned with controlling the activities that occur in the local market. Many companies have strict policies regarding how much ownership they should take in a firm abroad because of the importance of maintaining control. Governments of developing and emerging markets realize the benefits of investment by multinational corporations, which includes decreased unemployment, increased tax revenues, training to create more of a highly skilled workforce, and the transfer of technology. If we think about the purchase or build decisions, another important matter for managers is whether to purchase an existing business or to build a subsidiary abroad from the ground up, a greenfield investment. And then, you have to think about production costs. And these are very, very important to the inputs of the FDI decision. One approach, of production costs is called rationalized production, a system of production in which, each of its product's components is produced where the cost of producing that component is at its lowest. Then we have, Mexico's marijuana. The combination of a low-wage economy nestled next to a prosperous giant is now becoming a model for other regions that are split on wage or technology gaps. We have the cost of research and development. As technology becomes increasingly powerful competitive factor, the soaring cost of developing subsequent stages of technology has led multinational corporations to engage in cross-border alliances and acquisitions. We have customer knowledge. The behavioral bias is frequently an important issue in the decision whether to, undertake FDI. Following clients, firms commonly engage in FDI, where the firm, they supply have already invested abroad, and also following rivals. FDI decisions frequently resemble a follow the leader scenario in industries that have a limited number of large firms. In other words, many of these firms believe that choosing not to make a move parallel to that of the first mover might result. Why do governments intervene in FDI? Well, governments intervene, due to their balance of payments, and it's basically a national accounting system that records all receipts coming into the nation and all payments and entities, in another country. And if you remember before, we discussed imports and exports and the balance of payments, and how most companies wanted to export more than they imported for various reasons. And then we have the current account. The current account records transactions involving the import and export of goods and services, income receipts on the assets abroad, and income payments on foreign assets inside the country. And we have the capital account, which records transactions involving the purchase or sale of assets. These assets include, physical assets such as the foreign direct investments in factories and equipment, and financial assets such as shares in stocks, in a company abroad. Why do governments intervene? Other reasons include, to control the balance of payments, obtaining resources and benefits such as access to technology, management skills, and employment. Control the balance of payments. Many governments see intervention as the only way to keep their balance of payments under control. And obtaining resources and benefits. Beyond balance of payment reasons, governments might intervene in FDI flows to acquire resources and benefits such as technology, management skills, and employment. They might want to have access to technology. Investment in technology, whether in products or processes, tend to increase productivity and the competitiveness of a nation. Management skills and employment. Former communist nations lack some of the management skills needed to succeed in a global economy. By encouraging FDI, these nations can attract talented managers to come in and train their locals, and thereby improve, the international competitiveness of their domestic companies. You've also got home country discouraging, outward FDI. And the following are some of the common reasons for discouraging outward financial direct investment. So, investing in other nations sends resources out of the home country and lowers investments at home. An FDI outflow can damage a nation's balance of payments if the investment abroad eliminates an export market. And jobs created abroad by an FDI outflow may replace jobs from a home country. Home countries may also promote outward FDI. FDI outflows can increase long-term competitiveness if partnering abroad provides a learning opportunity. And FDI flows can eliminate low-wage jobs in industries that use obsolete technology or employ low-skilled workers at home. But, FDI is not always a negative influence on home nations. In fact, some countries promote outgoing FDI for the following reasons. Outgoing FDI can increase long-term competitiveness, and nations may encourage FDI in industries identified as sunset industries. Sunset industries are those that use outdated and obsolete technologies, of those that employ low wage workers with very few skills. Host countries, offer a variety of incentives to encourage FDI inflows. These take two general forms of financial incentives and infrastructure improvements. Financial incentives, hosts governments of all nations grant companies financial incentives to invest within their borders. One method is included in tax incentives, such as lower tax rates offers a waiver of tax to local profits for a period of time, extending as far as to 5 years, sometimes more. So a country may also offer low interest loans to investors. Infrastructure improvements, because of the problems associated with financial incentives. Some governments are taking an alternative route to luring investments. Lasting benefits for communities surrounding the investment location can result from making a local infrastructure improvements, better seaports suitable for containerized shipping, improved inroads, and advanced telecommunication systems. So here we can see the reason and what the government can do as regards to attracting financial direct investment into their country using financial incentives and infrastructure improvements. And we've seen it even with the British government in the automotive industry, giving tax breaks, providing financial assistance, and also infrastructure assistance within their plants as well. Host countries also have a variety of methods to restrict incoming FDI. Again, these take two general forms: ownership restriction and performance demands. Ownership restriction: governments can impose ownership restrictions that prohibit non-domestic companies from investing in certain industries or from owning certain types of businesses. And also performance demands, more common than ownership requirements, are performance demands that to encourage outbound FDI, home country governments can do any of the following. They can offer insurance to cover the risks of investment abroad, including among others, insurance against exploration of assets and losses from armed conflict, kidnapping, and terrorist attacks. They can offer grant loans to firms wishing to increase their investment abroad. They can offer tax breaks on profits earned abroad or negotiate special tax treaties. Apply political pressure on another nation to get them to relax their restrictions on inbound investment. On the other hand, to limit the effects of outbound FDI on the national economy, home governments may exercise either of the following two options. They might either impose differential tax rates that charge income from earnings abroad at a higher rate than domestic earnings, or they could impose outright sanctions that prohibit the domestic firms from making investments within certain nations. So over time, both the host and the home nations have developed a range of methods either to promote or to restrict. Let's have a look at this table. We can see this table here. Um, Governments use these tools for many reasons, including improving balance of payment positions, acquiring resources, and in the case of outward investment, keeping jobs at home. So we have discussed quite a lot today. We looked at the different methods of financial direct investment into other countries and the reasons why. We've looked at governments in policies and instruments they can use to encourage or prohibit FDI and the reasons why. So I hope that has helped today from Mr. Tan.